T.B.Photo X1.5 TFX, and welcome back to another video. Well, this time the video is titled "Can I Get Film for This?" And what it is about? It's about this little thing that has been on a bookcase or a bookshelf in my room for the past couple of months. It was when my grandmother was cleaning out her closet. I got this, and it's the Polaroid SUN 600 LMS, and this camera was introduced in 1983. I have a little bit of a cheat sheet down here, so I have the specs of this camera, so if I'm looking down a little bit, you know what it's all about. But anyway, this camera was the first camera in the Polaroid lineup where the exposure compensation system was renamed, as it says right here, if you can see it, a light management system. It has a single 116mm lens element, and it has a minimum focus distance of 4 feet, which equivalates to 120 centimeters or 1.2 meters. And this camera basically, I know that the Impossible project, so the question in the beginning, can I still get film for this, is yes I can, because Impossible made it possible. So basically, this camera is of pretty historical significance, to me at least, because this camera was the first ever camera that took the first ever picture of me right after I was born. So it has special significant, sentimental value to me, even though it's not, a really impressive camera in any other way. But the thing is, this video I would like to talk a little bit about Polaroid and the entire concept of it, because Polaroid, the company, was basically founded by Edwin H. Land, who lived between 1909 to 1991. Yeah, and his first camera, the first Polaroid camera, came out that Polaroid, the company, produced, came out in 1948, and it was the Polaroid 95A. And then later, maybe one of the most iconic Polaroid cameras that, unfortunately, thanks to Fuji film, we can't really get film for anymore. But there are forces at work to make that change. It's the Polaroid Land camera, the Polaroid Land 100, that was produced firstly in 1963. And this camera is a landmark in any aspect of camera manufacturing, because Polaroids, I think they were made for both professional photographers but also for artists. I think a lot of time it was that artists, painters and so on, when they were going to do a portrait of a person, they would take a Polaroid picture of that person, and then they would paint off that picture as a model. And I know that one of the most famous Polaroid users out there today was pop artist Andy Warhol, who frequently used Polaroids, for example, his silkscreen techniques. Yeah, but anyway, that was in 1971 when the Polaroid Big Shot was produced, and that camera is more or less synonymous with Andy Warhol and his portrait Polaroids. Yeah, but then in 1972, probably one of the most iconic, the Land camera is the iconic, more artist and landscape Polaroid camera, but for the consumer market, in 1972, probably the most iconic Polaroid consumer camera was introduced, and it was the Polaroid SX70, one of those folding Polaroid cameras. And these were special because they contained autofocus and some other more professional, or rather pro-grade, features that we had come to expect from other types of cameras at the time. And not autofocus, it was still manual focus, but it was a focusable Polaroid camera. And then real Polaroid, I mean the original Polaroid company founded by Edwin Land, they ran between, 1937 to 2001 when they went bankrupt. Then the name Polaroid was basically bought up by a holding company, and New Polaroid was introduced, and they flopped in 2008. And now we have the third iteration of Polaroid, where I think their most significant product to date is the Polaroid Cube action camera. But they're still around in one shape, one form or another. But yeah, that's a little bit of the history about Polaroid. And then, and the thing is with Polaroids that has fallen a little bit by the wayside today, unfortunately, is that a whole host of high-end medium format and large format cameras utilized Polaroid backs for their lineup. I mean, Fuji had medium formats that could use Polaroid backs. Hasselblad's had Polaroid backs. Mamiya's had Polaroid backs. Pentax had Polaroid backs. Rolliflex, and even the Hong Kong hipster camera, the Holga, could use Polaroid backs. But Polaroids were basically something before digital. Polaroid was the Chimping of the camera world. Excuse me. It was basically so that when a photographer was setting up a scene for a portrait shoot or anything, they would basically take a Polaroid with a, if they had a medium format camera, they would take a test shot with a Polaroid film to see if the framing of and the composition and the lighting were satisfactory for the type of shoot that they were intending to do. So it was basically the digital of its time, or rather the preview of its time. And there is a lot of famous photographers and artists that all have used Polaroids. Examples, one of the most acclaimed and highly celebrated landscape photographers of our time, of the 20th century, Ansel Adams. He was famous to use the SX70 in the 1970s, and before that he was also a Polaroid user. Even though he was mostly famous for large format, he also used Polaroids. Andy Warhol have we already been into with the Polaroid Big Shot and his silkscreen techniques. Robert Mapplethorpe, the guy from the CDI game and among other things, he was famous for using the Polaroid Land 360. Helmut Newton for Vogue magazine was famous for previewing his photos with a Polaroid camera. But here's the really interesting part of Polaroid history, and that is that when they went belly up in 2008, a dedicated group of Polaroid enthusiasts in the Netherlands bought the factory and continued to produce Polaroid film to this day, and that is of course the Impossible Project. And they have to this date, they have produced over 12 versions, 12 types of black and white and color Polaroid film. But for anybody who is in the know, they actually named themselves the Impossible Project because they knew that it wasn't possible to do authentic Polaroid film anymore, because the chemicals that were needed to make the original composition for the original film, or the original fast developer, it isn't made anymore. You can't get those chemicals, so they needed to do a proprietary own recipe, and that became the Impossible Project. Impossible because it's not possible to do authentic Polaroid film. But anyway, it seems to go well for them, and I wish them all the best into the future. And as I said, this camera special to me just because it's the first camera that ever took a picture of me hours after I was born. So it has sentimental value, even though it's not one of the most famous Polaroid models out there. But I would like to hear from you guys. Do you have any fond memories of Polaroid and their products and their lineup of films and so on? Because I think that's a little bit of a lost thing in photography nowadays. I know that Fuji also, even though they stopped making the FS100, they still have those smaller Polaroid, or rather instant film cameras, but they're a little bit toyish in my opinion, even though they might be handy as well. But I would like to hear your opinion on those and about Polaroid in general. Is it something that is worth preserving, or is it something that has passed its time, or is it a retro thing that will get a renaissance when pack film as well starts to be developed as well? I think it's New 52 in the US that has plans to develop pack film once again. But all in all, that's all for me for now on. This is Tobias Bergstrom from T.B.Photo X 1.5 TFX, and I would like to see you guys in the next video. Take care from now on. Bye.